The iron collar burned against her throat, but Aria Graves had learned not to flinch anymore. She stood on the platform in the center of the underground auction hall, wrists shackled behind her back, bare feet cold against the stone floor. The dress they'd forced her into was little more than tattered silk, deliberately torn to show the marks on her skin where the traders had beaten her for resisting. Around her neck, thick chains connected to a post driven deep into the ground. She couldn't run, she couldn't fight. She could only stand there while creatures that looked like beautiful nightmares circled closer, examining her like livestock. Because that's what she was to them. Livestock, food. A human in a world where vampires had stopped hiding in shadows 2 years ago and decided they were done pretending humanity still ruled anything. "Lot 47, the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying through the vaulted chamber. He was human too, a collaborator who'd sold out his own kind for protection and profit. Female, age 23, healthy blood type, no diseases. Starting bid at 500 gold. Aria kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the crowd. She'd seen enough of them already. Pale skin that seemed to glow in the torchlight, hair ranging from silver white to platinum blonde, every vampire in this room bearing the mark of their ancient bloodlines. They wore clothes that mixed modern fashion with old-world elegance, tailored suits with embroidered waistcoats, gowns that looked like they belonged in museums. Everything about them screamed power, wealth, and the absolute certainty that they were superior to every human breathing. 600, someone called. 700. 900. The bids climbed steadily. Aria's stomach twisted. She'd been captured 3 weeks ago when the traders raided the underground settlement where she'd been hiding. She'd watched them kill anyone who fought back and chain everyone else. She'd been loaded into trucks with 30 other humans, all of them destined for different auction houses throughout the city. This one, she'd learned, catered exclusively to vampire nobility, the oldest families, the ones with enough money and influence that human laws meant absolutely nothing to them. 1,500, a female vampire purred, stepping closer. Her eyes were the color of blood, and she ran her tongue across pointed fangs. She looks delicious. Aria's jaw clenched. She wanted to spit at the woman, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything except stand here passively. But the collar around her neck was spelled, she'd learned that the hard way. Any act of aggression, and it sent pain lancing through every nerve in her body until she collapsed. The traders had demonstrated that feature thoroughly. 2,000, another voice chimed in. The auctioneer smiled, clearly pleased with the turnout. 2,000 gold going once. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that Aria saw her breath mist in the air. Everyone froze. The massive double doors at the far end of the hall swung open without anyone touching them, and every vampire in the room immediately dropped to one knee, heads bowed. The human auctioneer's face went absolutely white. Aria's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched a figure step through those doors. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the same pale skin as every other vampire, but somehow more luminous, like moonlight given form. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, held back partially by what looked like a crown made of twisted silver and black stones. He wore a long coat that brushed the floor, black fabric embroidered with crimson thread, in patterns that seemed to move in the corner of Aria's vision. Beneath it, she caught glimpses of a tailored suit, every piece perfectly fitted to a body that radiated lethal grace. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, deep red, like garnets or fresh blood, ancient and knowing and terrifying in their intensity. When his gaze swept the room, she felt the weight of it, felt centuries of power and death compressed into a single look. "Rise," he said quietly, and despite the softness of his voice, it carried to every corner of the chamber. The vampires stood, but none of them met his eyes. The auctioneer looked like he might pass out. "Your Majesty," the man stammered, "we had no word that you would be attending tonight. If we had known, I do not announce my movements to auction houses." The Vampire King's voice remained quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. He moved forward with the fluid grace of a predator, his attention fixed on something. On her, Aria realized with a jolt. He was walking straight toward her platform, and every vampire in his path scrambled to move aside. His eyes never left her face, and she found herself unable to look away, caught in that crimson gaze like a moth frozen in firelight. He stopped at the base of the platform, tilting his head slightly. Up close, he was devastatingly beautiful, in the way ancient statues were beautiful, perfect and cold and completely inhuman. "Who hurt her?" he asked. The question was directed at the auctioneer, but the man seemed incapable of speech. One of the traders who'd captured Aria stepped forward instead, clearly not understanding the danger he was in. "She resisted, Your Majesty. We had to discipline her. Standard procedure for—" The trader's words cut off abruptly. Aria blinked, and the man was simply gone, reduced to ash that drifted slowly to the stone floor. She hadn't even seen the Vampire King move. The chamber was absolutely silent. "Standard procedure," the king repeated, his tone unchanged, still that same soft, gentle cadence. "How fascinating." He looked at the other traders scattered throughout the room. "How many of you touched her?" No one answered. No one dared to move. The king smiled, and it was the coldest thing Aria had ever seen. "I see. You all did." What happened next occurred so fast that Aria's human eyes could barely track it. The Vampire King moved through the room like death itself, and everywhere he passed, traders crumbled to ash. Screams erupted, people tried to run, none of them made it more than a few steps. Within seconds, maybe a dozen humans who'd worked for the auction house were dead, and the king returned to stand before Aria's platform as if he'd never moved at all. The only sign of exertion was a single drop of blood on his pale hand, which he wiped away with a black silk handkerchief. "Now then," he said pleasantly, looking up at Aria. "What was the current bid?" The auctioneer's voice shook. "T 2,000, Your Majesty." "I see. And how many humans do you have in this establishment tonight?" 47, including this one." The Vampire King reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he tossed to the auctioneer. The man caught it, nearly fumbled it, and stared at the contents with wide eyes. "That contains 100,000 in gold certificates," the king said. "I am purchasing every human you have in this building, right now. I want them all brought here, unharmed, within the next 5 minutes." The auctioneer gaped. "Your Majesty, that's far more than 4 minutes and 50 seconds. The man scrambled into motion, barking orders at his remaining staff. The vampire nobles in the audience remained frozen, clearly uncertain whether they were allowed to leave, or if moving would draw the king's attention. Aria's mind raced. What was happening? Why would the Vampire King buy all of them? What could he possibly want with 47 humans? The answer seemed obvious and terrifying. That much blood could feed a vampire court for weeks, but something about his behavior didn't fit. He'd killed the traders for hurting her. That didn't make sense if he was just planning to drain them all himself. The king turned his attention back to her, and she fought the urge to shrink away. There was nowhere to go anyway, not with these chains. "What is your name?" he asked. She swallowed. Her throat was dry, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Aria." "Aria," he repeated, and somehow it sounded different when he said it, each syllable precise and weighted. "I am Ravian Morteau. I rule the vampire territories in this region and 4 others. Do you know who I am?" "You're the king," she managed. "Yes." He studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You are not afraid." "I am," she admitted. "I'm terrified. Yet you meet my eyes. You speak clearly. Most humans collapse when I address them directly." His head tilted again, that same predatory bird motion. "Why did they capture you?" "I was hiding in the settlement on 5th Street. They raided it." "Why were you hiding?" Aria's hands clenched in their shackles. "Because I didn't want to end up in a place like this." "Yet, here you are." "Yes, here I am." Something flickered in those red eyes, too fast for her to interpret. Before he could respond, the staff began herding humans onto the floor. Men, women, even a few teenagers, all of them chained and collared like Aria. They looked confused and terrified, clearly having no idea why they'd been pulled from the holding cells. Ravian watched until all 47 were assembled. Then he raised one hand, and every single collar and chain in the room simply fell away, clattering to the stone floor. Aria gasped as the burning pressure around her throat vanished. She brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists where the shackles had left deep marks. All around her, humans were making similar sounds of shock and relief. "You are all free," Ravian announced, his voice carrying effortlessly. "There are trucks waiting outside this building. My people will take you to a safe location, provide you with food, medical care, and clothing. You may leave the city if you wish, or you may stay in my territory under my protection. The choice is yours. No one will stop you. No one will hurt you. You have my word." Silence greeted this pronouncement. The humans looked at each other, clearly not believing what they were hearing. One man, older than the rest with gray streaking his hair, stepped forward. "Why? What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Ravian said simply. "I want nothing from you. You are free. Go." "This is a trick," a woman whispered. "It has to be." Ravian's expression didn't change. "It is not. But I understand your skepticism. If you do not trust my word, then consider this. If I wished to harm you, I could do so now, and there would be nothing you could do to stop me. I have already paid for you. You belong to me by the laws of this auction house. I choose to release you. Accept it or do not, but make your choice quickly. My patience is not infinite." The vampire nobles, who'd been bidding earlier, looked as shocked as the humans. One of them, a male with elaborate silver jewelry braided into his white hair, dared to speak up. "Your Majesty, with respect, the human trade is legal. These purchases were made in accordance—" "I am aware of the laws," Ravian said without looking at him. "I am also aware that I am the one who can change them. Consider that as you return to your estates tonight." The noble fell silent immediately. Slowly, hesitantly, the freed humans began moving toward the exit. Staff members, humans themselves, though collaborators guided them out, looking as confused as everyone else. Aria started to follow, but Ravian's voice stopped her. "Not you." She froze. Her heart sank. There it was. Whatever his real game was, she was about to find out. The other humans filed out, some of them glancing back at her with pity. Within minutes, the chamber was empty, except for Aria, Ravian, and a handful of vampire nobles who seemed uncertain whether they'd been dismissed. "Leave us," Ravian said, still not looking away from Aria. The nobles vanished so quickly they might as well have teleported. Now it was just the two of them in this vast stone chamber, and Aria felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Her heart hammered. She was still standing on the platform, and he was at its base, which put their eyes almost level. "You thought I lied," he observed. "You thought I freed them but kept you." She lifted her chin. "Didn't you?" "No, you're free as well. But I wanted to speak with you first." He moved closer, and she realized just how tall he truly was. If he'd been standing on the platform with her, she would barely reach his shoulder. "Why do you have blood magic residue in your scars?" Aria's breath caught. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. I can smell it on you. Someone tried to bind you with blood magic and you resisted. The binding broke, but it left traces." His eyes narrowed. "Who cast it?" She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The memory of that night was still too fresh, too raw. Ravian stepped up onto the platform. Suddenly, he was right there, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way no pore or blemish marked his skin. Close enough that she caught his scent, something like winter air and old books in copper. "I will not harm you," he said quietly. "But I need to know who tried to bloodbind a human. That magic has been forbidden for 3 centuries. "Why do you care?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "You're a vampire. You're their king. Why does any of this matter to you?" His expression shifted, something ancient and sad moving behind his eyes. "Because I remember what it was like before we revealed ourselves. I remember the promises we made about how coexistence would work. I remember the laws we swore to uphold." He gestured at the empty chamber. "This is not what I wanted. Any of this. And blood binding a human is not just illegal, it is an act that could start a war between our kinds that would devastate what remains of both our populations." Aria searched his face, looking for deception, for the trap. But all she saw was a strange, weary sincerity that didn't match the terrifying display of power she'd witnessed minutes ago. "It was a vampire named Lucian," she finally said. "I don't know his family name. He came to our settlement 6 months ago, pretending to be sympathetic, pretending he wanted to help. Then one night he tried to bind me to him, said he wanted a permanent blood source that couldn't refuse him. She swallowed hard. "I managed to break the circle before the spell completed. It nearly killed me. He ran, and I never saw him again." Ravian's face had gone absolutely still. When he spoke, his voice was colder than anything she'd heard yet. "Lucien Devereaux. Pale even for our kind, silver eyes, scar on his left hand? Yes. He is in the dungeon of my estate as of 3 days ago, charged with multiple violations of our peace treaties. The charges now include attempted blood binding." Ravian's eyes met hers. "Would you testify to this? Would it matter? Human testimony against a vampire?" "In my court, yes. I do not play favorites with my own kind when they break laws that protect the fragile peace we maintain. If you testify, and I verify your claim through blood memory, Lucien Devereaux will be executed." Aria stared at him. Blood memory, she'd heard of it. Supposedly ancient vampires could read the truth in blood, could see memories and lies laid bare. If that was real, then Ravian would know she was telling the truth. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "All of it, freeing everyone, killing the traitors, caring about illegal magic." Ravian was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back, putting space between them. "Come with me, I will show you something." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "You are free to refuse, but if you come, I will answer your questions, all of them. And then you may still leave if you wish, with money and safe passage out of vampire territories entirely." He extended one hand toward her. "I swear on my crown and my bloodline that you will not be harmed." Aria looked at that outstretched hand. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust him, not to go anywhere with the vampire king. But she also thought about the way he'd killed those traitors for hurting her, the way he'd freed 46 other humans without asking for anything, the weariness in his eyes when he talked about promises and laws. Against her better judgment, she took his hand. His skin was cold, but not unpleasantly so. Just cool, like marble that had been kept in shadow. His fingers closed gently around hers, and then the world lurched. When her vision cleared, they were somewhere else entirely. Aria stumbled, and Ravian steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Apologies. I should have warned you about the transportation spell." She looked around, trying to get her bearings. They were in a massive library, shelves stretching up 3 stories, filled with more books than she'd ever seen in her life. Soft light came from floating orbs that drifted near the ceiling. The floor was polished wood, and comfortable chairs were scattered throughout. Somehow, despite the grandeur, it felt peaceful. "Where are we?" "My private estate, specifically my personal library." Ravian released her hand and walked toward one of the shelves. "The estate is 10 miles outside the city, built partially underground to protect from sunlight. Before you ask, yes, sunlight is lethal to us. The older we are, the longer we can withstand it, but even I would burn within minutes of direct exposure." He pulled a book from the shelf and brought it back to her. It was old, the leather cover worn, the pages yellowed. He opened it to a marked section and held it out. Aria took it hesitantly and looked at the page. It was handwritten in elegant script, though she had to squint to make out some of the archaic language. "Read the underlined section," Ravian said. She did. "We who have hidden in shadow for millennia have watched humanity with both hunger and fascination. They are fragile, brief as candle flames, yet they create beauty we can only envy. If we are to step into their light, we must do so as protectors, not predators. We must earn the right to exist alongside them, not above them. The alternative is extinction, theirs or ours or both. I choose a different path." She looked up. "What is this?" "My journal. I wrote that entry 230 years ago, long before most vampires even considered revealing our existence." Ravian took the book back, closing it carefully. "I have spent centuries working toward a world where our kinds could coexist. When we finally revealed ourselves, I pushed for laws to protect humans, for regulated blood donation instead of hunting, for harsh penalties against any vampire who broke the peace. Then what happened? Because this," she gestured vaguely, meaning the auction house, the traders, everything. "This isn't coexistence. No, it is not." He set the journal down on a nearby table. "What happened is that many of my kind viewed my laws as weakness. They saw humans as prey, as property, and they resented being told otherwise. The human governments were fractured and weakened by our revelation. Within a year, resistance collapsed in most regions. Black markets formed, illegal trade. And I? He paused, something like pain crossing his features. I've been trying to hold back an ocean with my hands. I enforce the laws in my territories. I execute those who violate them, but there are not enough of me. Not enough who believe as I do. Aria felt her anger rising. So the solution is to buy humans at auction? To play by their rules? The solution is to free every human I find in these markets and kill every trader who profits from them, Ravian said. And suddenly that cold, dangerous vampire king was back in his voice. I have attended 17 auctions in the past month. I have purchased and freed over 300 humans. I have killed 42 traders and 14 vampire nobles who tried to stop me. Tonight was not an aberration. It is what I do every night in every territory I can reach. She stared at him, processing this. You're fighting against your own kind. Yes. They must want you dead. Many do. There have been 6 assassination attempts in the past year alone. He said it casually, as if it were barely worth mentioning. None have succeeded. Obviously. The corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been the ghost of a smile. I'm quite difficult to kill. Aria moved to one of the chairs and sat down, her legs suddenly shaky. It was all too much to process. The Vampire King was waging a one-man war against the slave trade, using his power and wealth to free humans and destroy the markets. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it was terrifying in a different way. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Ravian remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. Because you asked, and because I want you to understand that you are safe here. I brought you to my home because I have questions about Lucien Devereaux, and because I wanted to offer you a choice. What choice? You may leave, as I promised. I will provide you with resources and passage. Or... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. You may stay, not as a prisoner, not as property, as a guest, and eventually, if you wish, as someone who could help me. Help you how? I need humans who understand what others of your kind are experiencing, who can help identify the networks that capture and traffic people, who can testify in my courts when I prosecute violators. His red eyes held hers. I need allies, Aria. I cannot do this alone anymore. It made a horrible kind of sense, and it was also potentially a very sophisticated trap. But if it was a trap, she couldn't figure out the angle. He'd already freed everyone from the auction house. He hadn't tried to harm her or bind her. He'd shown her his private library, told her about his goals and his vulnerabilities. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, I will have someone show you to a guest room. You may explore the estate freely, though I recommend avoiding the eastern wing after midnight, as that is when I hold court and it can become unpleasant. If you decide to leave, simply tell any of the staff and they will arrange transportation. If you decide to stay, come find me tomorrow evening. He moved toward the library door, then paused. For what it is worth, I am sorry for what was done to you. The traders, the collar, the auction, you deserved none of it. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the library with her racing thoughts. A few minutes later, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was human, middle-aged, with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun. Hello, dear. I'm Margaret, the head of household staff. His Majesty asked me to show you to a room. Are you hungry? When did you last eat? Aria realized she couldn't remember. Yesterday, maybe, Margaret tisked. Come on, then. We'll get you settled and fed. You look exhausted. She was. Now that the adrenaline was fading, Aria felt the bone-deep weariness of 3 weeks in captivity, of terror and pain and starvation rations. She followed Margaret through corridors that mixed ancient stone with modern amenities, up a sweeping staircase to a door that opened onto a bedroom larger than the entire apartment Aria had lived in before the revelation. There's a bathroom through there, Margaret said, pointing. I'll bring up some food and clean clothes. You just rest, dear. You're safe here. Everyone kept saying that. Aria wanted desperately to believe it. After Margaret left, she explored the room. The bed was enormous, piled with soft blankets and pillows. The bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in. The closet was stocked with clothes in various sizes. Everything was luxurious and comfortable and completely surreal. She ended up in the bathroom, running a bath as hot as she could stand. When she finally sank into the water, she let herself cry for the first time since her capture. great heaving sobs that echoed off the marble walls, releasing weeks of terror and helplessness. By the time she'd cried herself out, the water had cooled. She scrubbed herself clean, washing away the filth of the auction house, and emerged to find a tray of food waiting on the bedside table. Simple fare bread, cheese, fruit, soup, but it smelled like heaven. She ate until her stomach hurt, then crawled into the bed in one of the soft shirts she'd found in the closet. The mattress was impossibly comfortable, and within minutes she was asleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and panicked before remembering where she was. The Vampire King's estate. Underground, he'd said, but there must have been some kind of light shafts or magic involved, because this was definitely natural sunlight warming her face. Aria got up and dressed in clothes from the closet jeans that fit reasonably well and a sweater that was warm and soft. Then she ventured out of the room. The estate was massive. She wandered for an hour, finding libraries and sitting rooms and halls lined with portraits of stern-looking vampires. She saw other humans, all of them staff members who nodded politely but didn't seem afraid. She found a kitchen where a chef was preparing what smelled like an elaborate dinner and a conservatory filled with plants that shouldn't have been able to grow underground. Finally, she found a balcony that looked out over an underground cavern so vast she couldn't see the far wall. Buildings were carved into the rock face, lights glowing in windows, and she realized this wasn't just an estate. It was an entire city hidden beneath the earth. "It's called the Night Court," a voice said behind her. She turned to find a vampire watching her from the balcony doorway. Not Ravian. This one was shorter, with sharper features and eyes that were more amber than red. He wore modern clothes, jeans, and a black shirt, though the way he carried himself spoke of the same ancient confidence all vampires seemed to have. "I'm sorry," Aria said quickly. "I was just exploring. I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. His Majesty said you were a guest." The vampire stepped onto the balcony, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Soren. I serve as one of Ravian's advisors, though he rarely takes my advice." "Aria," she studied him warily. "Are you going to tell me I should leave?" "On the contrary, I hope you stay." That surprised her. "Why?" Soren leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the cavern city. "Because Ravian is slowly burning himself out, trying to save both our species from a war I'm not sure we can avoid. He needs allies. He needs hope that what he's trying to do is possible, and he needs someone who will tell him the truth about what humans actually need, not what we vampires assume they need. He has you, other advisors. We're vampires. We can empathize, but we can't truly understand. Our perspectives are skewed by centuries of being the predators in this relationship." Soren glanced at her. "You've been in those auction houses. You've seen the worst of what we've become. That perspective is valuable." Aria turned back to the view. "What happens if I stay and this all goes wrong? If his enemies come after him and I'm here?" "Then you'll probably die," Soren said bluntly. "I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. Ravian has powerful enemies who would love to see his reform movement crushed. Anyone associated with him is a target." Comforting. You asked for truth. She had. And strangely, she appreciated his honesty more than she would have appreciated empty reassurances. "What's he like?" "Really?" Soren considered the question. "Old, powerful, stubborn as hell. He believes in honor and justice in a way most of our kind find baffling or naive. He holds himself to impossible standards, and he cares more about the future of both our species than he does about his own survival, which is both admirable and deeply frustrating for those of us trying to keep him alive. So he's serious about all of this, the reforms, the laws, stopping the trade. Deadly serious. He's been working toward this for longer than most countries have existed." Soren pushed away from the railing. "He's in the Eastern Wing right now if you want to talk to him. Court ended an hour ago." "I thought he only held court after midnight." "Usually, but there was an urgent matter this morning." Something dark crossed Soren's expression. "The trial of Lucien Devereaux." Aria's stomach dropped. "Already?" "Ravian doesn't waste time when he has enough evidence. Come, you should be there for the sentencing if you're willing." She didn't particularly want to see Lucien again, but she also felt like she needed to see if Ravian's justice was real or just another performance. Soren led her through the estate to a pair of massive doors carved with intricate designs. Guards stood on either side, vampires in dark armor, both of them watching Aria with unreadable expressions as Soren nodded and pushed the doors open. The chamber beyond was designed like a throne room from a Gothic cathedral. Vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows that somehow glowed despite being underground, rows of seats filled with vampire nobles in elaborate dress. At the far end, on a dais, sat an ornate chair that was definitely a throne, and in that throne sat Ravian. He looked different than he had last night, more formal, more distant. He wore a crown openly now, the twisted silver and black stone circlet, and his coat was embroidered with what looked like maps of his territories. Every inch the vampire king, powerful and remote and terrifying. In front of the dais, chained and kneeling, was Lucian. Aria recognized him immediately, pale even for a vampire, silver eyes that had once seemed kind and now just looked calculating. The scar on his left hand where she'd burned him with the iron poker when she broke his binding circle. Those silver eyes found her as she entered, and a hatred flashed across his face. "You!" he snarled. "You brought me here. You told him, 'Silence!'" Ravian's voice cut through the chamber like a blade, and Lucian's mouth snapped shut as if compelled by magic. Probably was, Aria realized. "Lucian Devereaux, you have been found guilty of 14 counts of illegal blood binding, 23 counts of assault against humans under my protection, and 8 counts of trafficking. The evidence is irrefutable. Your own blood memories condemn you." "She was nothing!" Lucian shouted, gesturing at Aria despite the chains. "A human! Why does her word matter against mine? Why does any of this matter? They're prey." The nobles in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Some looked sympathetic to Lucian's position, Aria realized with a chill. They agreed with him. Ravian's expression didn't change. "Miss Graves, please step forward." Aria's legs felt weak, but she walked down the center aisle, acutely aware of dozens of vampires watching her every move. She stopped a few feet from the dais, close enough to see the details of Ravian's face. He looked tired, she thought. Despite the regal bearing and the power radiating from him, there was a weariness in his eyes that she recognized from last night. "You are under no obligation to speak," he said, addressing her directly. "But if you have words for this court, you may share them." Aria looked at Lucian, then back at Ravian. Then she turned to address the assembled nobles. "I don't know how many of you care what a human thinks," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "But I'll say it anyway. 6 months ago, this vampire came to my settlement pretending to be an ally. He said he wanted to help us, protect us. We trusted him. And then he tried to bind me with blood magic so I would be his permanent food source, unable to refuse, unable to resist for the rest of my life. I broke free and nearly died doing it. And how many others didn't break free? How many others did he successfully bind?" She looked around the room. Some vampires had the grace to look uncomfortable. Others just stared at her with cold disdain. "You can think we're nothing," she continued. "You can think we're just prey. But you live in our world now. We know you exist. And if you keep treating us like this, eventually humans will decide that burning down everything, even if it means we die too, is better than living as your cattle. Is that what you want? Mutual destruction?" Silence greeted her words. Then Ravian spoke. "The human race numbers over 7 billion, even after the chaos of the revelation. We number perhaps 200,000 worldwide, if we're generous with the count. We are stronger, faster, functionally immortal. But they vastly outnumber us, and they are adaptable and clever and desperate." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Graves is correct. If we push them far enough, they will find ways to destroy us, even if it costs them everything. That is what I'm trying to prevent. Not out of fear, but because I believe both our species have value and deserve to continue existing." "Your Majesty," one of the nobles said, standing. "With respect, making an example of Lucian for blood binding a single human seems excessive." 23 humans, Ravian corrected coldly. 23 that we found evidence of, likely far more. And blood binding is not just illegal, Lord Castian, it is an atrocity. It removes free will entirely. The victim becomes a puppet, even I with all my power. Consider that magic abhorrent and refuse to practice it." His red eyes swept the room. Any of you who disagree with that assessment may leave my territories. I will not stop you, but you will not practice that magic here." No one moved. Ravian stood, and the presence of him seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Lucien Devereaux, for your crimes, I sentence you to death by sunlight, sentence to be carried out immediately." Lucien started screaming, fighting against his chains. 2 guards grabbed him and dragged him toward a side door. His screams echoed even after the door closed. Aria felt sick. She'd wanted justice, but the reality of it was harsher than she'd expected. Sunlight was a slow, agonizing way for a vampire to die. Ravian was watching her, she realized, reading her reaction. "Court is dismissed," he said. "Leave us." The nobles filed out, some of them shooting glances at Aria that ranged from curious to hostile. Within minutes, the chamber was empty except for her and Ravian. He descended from the dais, moving with that same lethal grace. "You think me cruel." "I think justice is complicated," Aria said carefully. "It is. But sometimes cruelty toward one prevents greater cruelty toward many." He stood a few feet away, and she realized he was deliberately keeping his distance, giving her space. Lucien would have continued. He would have bound more humans, hurt more people. This ends that. "I know. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I wanted him stopped. I wanted him punished. But hearing him scream made it real, made you question whether you truly wanted this." Ravian nodded slowly. "That reaction means you have empathy, conscience. Hold on to that. The world needs more of it." Aria looked up at him. "Soren said you're trying to prevent a war." "I am." "Do you think you can?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think I can delay it. Perhaps long enough for enough vampires to see the value in coexistence, perhaps long enough for humans to rebuild their societies and establish real protections, perhaps long enough for attitudes to change on both sides." He met her eyes. "But I cannot do it alone. And I am asking you again to help me. Not because I have any right to your assistance, but because you have seen both the worst of my kind and the best we might become. Your perspective is valuable. What would you actually need me to do? Help coordinate with the humans I've freed. Many of them don't trust vampires for good reason, but they might trust someone who went through what they did. Help me understand how the trafficking networks operate from the victim's side. Testify in trials like today's. And," he hesitated, "be honest with me when my plans are failing or short-sighted. I need advisors who will challenge me, not just tell me what I want to hear." It was a reasonable request. More than reasonable, really. And yet Aria felt the weight of it. Working with the Vampire King meant making herself a target for his enemies. It meant staying in a world she'd been trying to escape, but it also meant actually doing something, fighting back in a way that might matter. "I'll stay," she said. "For now. Trial basis. If this gets too dangerous, or if I think you're lying about your intentions, I'm gone." Something that might have been relief flickered across Ravian's face. "Fair enough. Thank you, Aria." The next weeks blurred together in a strange new routine. Aria worked with Margaret and Soren to reach out to the humans Ravian had freed, helping them get settled in safe houses throughout the territory or arranging passage out for those who wanted to leave entirely. She sat in on Ravian's court proceedings, learning the complex web of vampire politics and law. She provided testimony in 3 more trials of vampires accused of crimes against humans, and she spent her evenings in the library with Ravian, discussing strategy and philosophy and the seemingly impossible task of making 2 species coexist peacefully. He was easier to talk to than she'd expected. Away from the formal court, he dropped some of the regal distance and revealed a sharp mind and a dry wit that occasionally caught her off guard. He asked her questions constantly about human culture, about her life before the revelation, about what she thought would actually make humans feel safe again. "A voice," she said one night. They were sitting in comfortable chairs near one of the library's massive fireplaces, reviewing reports of trafficking activity in the Northern Territories. "Humans need a voice in your government. Right now you make laws about us for us, but without us. That breeds resentment and distrust." Ravian frowned, considering. "A human representative in my court? Representatives, plural, from different regions and backgrounds, People elected by other humans, not appointed by you. She set down the report she'd been reading. I know it's not how vampire hierarchy works, but if you want humans to believe this coexistence thing is real, they need to see that their opinions matter. It would be controversial. Many vampires would view it as giving prey a seat at the table. Then maybe they need to stop thinking of us as prey. He smiled at that, a real smile that softened the harsh lines of his face. You do not hold back, do you? You said you wanted honesty. I did, and I appreciate it, even when it's uncomfortable. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight casting shadows across his pale features. I will consider the representative idea. It has merit, though implementing it will take time. Everything you're trying to do takes time. Yes. Unfortunately, I have an abundance of time. Humans do not. That asymmetry makes everything more difficult. Aria studied him curiously. How old are you, actually? By human reckoning, approximately 1,700 years old. I was born in what is now called Romania, turned when I was 30, and have been undead ever since. 17 centuries. The sheer scope of that was almost impossible to comprehend. What was it like? Watching the world change that much? Fascinating, terrifying, often both at once. His eyes went distant, looking at something she couldn't see. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched humanity go from torches to electric lights, from swords to nuclear weapons, seen your kind nearly destroy yourselves a dozen times over and always somehow pull back from the brink. It gives me hope that we can do the same now. Were you always like this, wanting coexistence? No, the admission was quiet. For the first few centuries, I was exactly what you would expect, a predator, a killer, concerned only with my own power and survival. It took time and experiences I am not proud of for me to change my perspective. What changed it? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I fell in love with a human woman. Her name was Elena. This was nearly 1,000 years ago, in a small village in France. She was a healer, brave and kind, and completely unafraid of me when she discovered what I was. His voice went soft. I tried to turn her, to give her immortality so we could be together, but the transformation failed. It fails sometimes, though we do not know why. And I watched her die in agony, knowing I had killed her with my arrogance. Aria felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. It taught me that humans are not lesser beings to be used or dominated. They have value separate from their blood, their fragility, their brief lifespans. Elena's life mattered, her choices mattered, and I spent the next centuries trying to become worthy of what she had taught me. He looked at Aria then, really looked at her, and she saw centuries of regret and determination in those red eyes. That is why I do this. All of it. Because I failed her. But I will not fail her memory. They sat in silence for a while after that, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Aria didn't know what to say to that kind of revelation, that depth of grief carried for centuries. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. You deserve to know why I ask you to trust me. Over the following weeks, Aria found herself spending more and more time with Ravian. Working relationship, she told herself firmly, strategic partnership. But she couldn't deny that she looked forward to their evening conversations, to the way his face would almost smile when she made a particularly good point, to the rare moments when he would laugh at something unexpected. She was also increasingly aware of the physical reality of him, the way he moved with predatory grace, the cold beauty of his features, the intensity of his attention when he listened to her speak. It was dangerous territory, she knew. He was a vampire, a centuries-old creature who could kill her without effort. Getting attached was stupid. And yet, one night she woke from a nightmare, the memory of the auction house collar burning around her throat. She couldn't get back to sleep, so she went down to the library, hoping to find something to read. Ravian was there, standing by one of the tall windows that looked out over the underground city. He was silhouetted against the lights, looking lonely despite all his power. Can't sleep? He asked without turning around. Nightmares. You? I don't sleep much. A few hours every few days is sufficient for my age. She joined him at the window. Do you ever get tired of it? Being responsible for everything, everyone? Constantly. But the alternative is abandoning them to chaos. He glanced at her. What do you dream about when the nightmares come? The collar, the chains, being helpless. She rubbed her throat unconsciously. You? Elena. The others I failed to save over the centuries, the war I am trying to prevent, and the growing certainty that I may not be able to. He was quiet for a moment. You are settling in here, I have noticed. Is that a problem? No, the opposite. I am grateful for your presence. The work is less lonely with an ally who understands. There was something vulnerable in his tone, something that made her heart ache. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was cool, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around hers, gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. You're not alone, she said. Not anymore. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Aria, An explosion rocked the estate. Ravian moved so fast she didn't see it, pulling her behind him as the window shattered inward. Vampires poured through the opening, moving with inhuman speed, all of them in dark armor and wielding weapons that gleamed with silver edges. Assassins, Ravian said, his voice utterly calm. Stay behind me. He moved into the attackers like death incarnate. Aria watched, pressed against a bookshelf, as the Vampire King fought with a speed and skill that defied comprehension. He didn't use weapons, didn't need them. His bare hands were enough. Vampires fell, reduced to ash, their screams cut short. But there were so many of them, 12, 2 dozen, more, pouring through the broken window. And some were getting past Ravian, heading deeper into the estate, toward the staff quarters, toward Margaret and the other humans. Aria didn't think. She grabbed a fallen weapon, a silver dagger that burned her palm, and ran. She heard Ravian shout her name, but she didn't stop. She knew where the staff quarters were, had visited them often. She ran through corridors, her heart hammering, and burst into the common area just as 3 assassins cornered Margaret and 2 other humans against a wall. "Hey!" Aria shouted. The vampires turned, and one of them laughed. A human with a weapon! How precious! "I've killed a vampire before," Aria lied, raising the dagger. "Try me." They did. The first one lunged, and Aria discovered that sheer terror and desperation could make you faster than you thought possible. She ducked under his grasping hands and drove the dagger up through his chest. The silver burned through his heart, and he exploded into ash. The other 2 hesitated, suddenly taking her seriously. But before they could attack again, Soren appeared from a side corridor and destroyed one with a blast of fire from his hands. A heartbeat later, Ravian was there, finishing the 3rd. Then it was over. The silence was deafening. Ravian turned to Aria, and the look on his face was terrifying. Not angry, worse, afraid. "You ran toward them," he said, his voice shaking. "You ran into danger. They were going to kill Margaret. You could have died." He crossed the space between them and grabbed her shoulders, not hard enough to hurt, but with clear desperation. "You are mortal, fragile, and you ran toward vampires who would have torn you apart." "I'm fine," she said, though her hands were shaking. "I'm okay." He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her with a force that drove the breath from her lungs. She felt him trembling, felt the fear radiating from him, and realized with a shock that he was terrified for her. "Don't do that again," he said against her hair. "Please, I cannot lose someone else." Understanding crashed over her. He was seeing Elena, seeing another human woman. He cared about dying because of his world, his enemies. "I'm here," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm alive, I'm okay." He held her for a long moment, and she felt the tension slowly drain from him. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were haunted. "You killed a vampire to save my staff. I told you I'd killed one before. That wasn't technically a lie anymore." That startled a laugh out of him, brief and shaky. Then his expression turned serious. "This was the Coven of Ash, a radical faction that believes humans should be eradicated entirely. They have been hunting me for years. Are they gone now? This cell is. There will be others." He looked at Margaret and the other humans, all of them shaken but alive. "Is anyone hurt?" They shook their heads. Margaret was staring at Aria like she'd grown wings. "You saved us." "We saved each other," Aria said, glancing at Soren and Ravian. The rest of the night was spent dealing with the aftermath. Ravian's guards hunted down the few remaining assassins who'd fled. The estate's defenses were reinforced, and a council meeting was called for the following evening to address the attack. Aria attended, sitting beside Ravian's throne as various nobles argued about security measures and retaliation strategies. She noticed the look some of them gave her curiosity, calculation, a few with outright hostility. "She killed one of the Ash," Soren told the council, "a human with a silver blade, facing down vampires to protect our staff. I think that demonstrates both courage and value." "Or foolishness," one of the hostile nobles muttered. "Enough," Ravian's voice cut through the murmurs. "Miss Graves acted to defend those under my protection. Her actions reflect the kind of cooperation I have been trying to build between our kinds. She will remain here as my guest and advisor, and anyone who takes issue with that may leave my court." The noble who'd muttered fell silent. After the council dispersed, Ravian asked Aria to walk with him through the estate gardens, another impossibility, an underground garden lit by magical lights that mimicked sunlight. "You have made enemies tonight," he said quietly, "by defending my people, by being publicly associated with me. If you want to leave, I will understand. I can give you resources, a new identity, safe passage to territories where you will not be connected to me." Aria stopped walking and turned to face him. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word was immediate, vehement. "But what I want is not the question. This is about your safety. I'm as safe here as I would be anywhere else. Probably safer, actually, given that you're essentially a one-vampire army." She stepped closer. "And I don't want to leave. I care about this work, about what you're trying to do." "Is that all you care about?" His red eyes searched her face. "The work?" Her heart was pounding. "No, Aria." His voice was rough, almost broken. "You must know how dangerous this is, not just the assassins and the politics, but this. Us. I am a vampire. You are human. I could hurt you without meaning to. I could outlive you by centuries. There is no future where this ends well." "Maybe not," she said, "but we're already living in a world with no guaranteed future. So maybe we stop worrying about how it ends and focus on what we have right now." He stared at her, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Desire and fear and guilt and hope, all tangled together. Then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, his cool lips against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. But when she leaned into him, when her hands came up to tangle in his white hair, the kiss deepened. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she felt the centuries-old loneliness in the way he held her, the desperate need to connect with someone who saw him as more than just a crown and a title. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Well, she was breathing hard. He looked shaken but not winded vampire lungs, she guessed. "This is a terrible idea," he said, "probably. I cannot promise you safety or a normal life. I don't want normal. Normal was living in fear, hiding from your kind. This, at least, feels like I'm doing something that matters." His hand came up to cup her face, cool fingers against her warm skin. "You matter. More than you should. More than is wise." "Same." He smiled at that, really smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to heartbreakingly beautiful. "Then we are both fools." "Sounds about right." They stood there in the impossible garden, vampire and human, holding each other while the magical lights cast soft shadows around them. Aria knew this was dangerous, knew she was risking her heart and possibly her life. But for the first time since the world had changed, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next months were a blur of work and stolen moments. Aria continued coordinating with freed humans, testifying in trials, and advising Ravian on policy. She also trained with Soren, learning basic self-defense and how to handle silver weapons effectively. If she was going to stay in this world, she wanted to be able to protect herself. Her relationship with Ravian deepened in quiet ways. Evening conversations that lasted until dawn, his hand finding hers during difficult council meetings, the way he would seek her out after particularly brutal trials, needing her presence to ground him. They were careful in public, but in private, they allowed themselves to be honest about what was growing between them. "I have not felt this way in centuries," he told her one night, his head resting in her lap while she read aloud from one of his journals. "It terrifies me." "Love is supposed to be terrifying," she said, running her fingers through his white hair. "I never said love. You didn't have to." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I love you, and I'm afraid of what that means." "I love you too. And same." She set the journal aside. "But we're doing this anyway, right?" "Yes, we are." He sat up and pulled her into his arms. "Though, I reserve the right to be overprotective and occasionally irrational about your safety. And I reserve the right to call you out when you're being ridiculous. Fair." They made it work. It wasn't always easy. There were cultural gaps, differences in perception and experience that sometimes led to misunderstandings. But they were both committed to trying, to building something real, despite the impossibility of it all. The Human Representative Program launched 6 months after the assassination attempt. Aria helped organize elections in human communities throughout Ravian's territories, and 12 representatives were chosen to join an advisory council. It wasn't full integration, not yet, but it was a start. A real voice for humans in vampire governance. The response from other vampire territories was mixed. Some saw it as weakness, others began tentatively exploring similar programs, and the radical factions, like the Coven of Ash, ramped up their attacks. Ravian's estate was hit twice more, both times they held, though the cost was high. 3 staff members died in the second attack, and Aria watched Ravian mourn them with a grief that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "Sometimes I wonder if I am just delaying the inevitable," he said the night after they held the memorial service. They were in his private chambers, a place she'd been spending more and more time. "If the war is coming, regardless of what I do." "Maybe it is," Aria said. She was curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "But you're also showing people that another way is possible. You're proving that vampires and humans can work together, can care about each other. That matters, even if the war comes anyway." "You are my hope," he said quietly. "You and the others like you who chose to stay, to fight for this dream. I do not deserve you." "Probably not," she teased, "but you're stuck with me anyway." He kissed the top of her head. "Gladly stuck." A year after Aria had been brought to his estate, Ravian called a gathering of all the major vampire lords in the eastern territories. It was a risk putting that many powerful vampires in one place, many of whom disagreed with his policies. But he'd decided it was time to push for broader reforms, and that required convincing the other rulers. The gathering was held in a massive underground amphitheater with hundreds of vampires in attendance. Aria stood beside Ravian's throne, wearing formal clothes he'd commissioned for her, elegant and practical, with hidden silver blades sewn into the jacket, just in case. "We are at a crossroads," Ravian told the assembled vampires. "We can continue down the path of domination and exploitation, or we can build something better. I am not naive. I know coexistence will be difficult, but the alternative is extinction for both our species. Humans will not accept subjugation forever. They will find ways to fight back, and when they do, the war will devastate us all." "Why should we care if humans fight back?" one lord challenged. "We are stronger." "Strength means nothing against numbers and determination," Ravian countered. "And before you dismiss that possibility, remember that humans have already developed silver bullets, UV weapons, and wood-treated explosives specifically designed to kill us. They are adapting, evolving their tactics. How long before they create something that can wipe us out entirely?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The lord who'd challenged him looked less certain. "I propose a treaty," Ravian continued, "a formal agreement between vampire territories and human governments. Mutual recognition, protected rights for both species, harsh penalties for violations on either side. It is not perfect, but it is a foundation we can build on." The debate that followed was fierce. Some vampires were open to the idea, others vehemently opposed, and a few made it clear they would never agree to treating humans as equals. In the end, Ravian got about half the lords to sign on to a preliminary agreement. It was progress, but not enough. The territories remained divided. As the gathering dispersed, one of the lords who'd opposed the treaty approached Ravian. Lord Thorn, ancient and powerful, with eyes like chips of ice. "You are gambling everything on a human pet," Thorn said, looking pointedly at Aria. It will be your downfall. She is not a pet, Ravian said coldly. She is my partner, and if you ever speak of her that way again, you will discover exactly why I have held this crown for 3 centuries. Thorn left without another word, but the threat hung in the air. He's going to come after us, Aria said once they were alone. Probably. I've made many enemies tonight. Ravian took her hand. I want you to leave, temporarily. Go somewhere safe while I deal with the fallout from this. No. Aria. No, I'm not leaving you to face this alone. We're partners, remember? You just said so yourself. He looked at her with such raw love and fear that it hurt. I cannot lose you. Then we'll make sure you don't, she squeezed his hand. Together. The attack came 3 days later. Not assassins this time, a full assault. Lord Thorn had allied with the Coven of Ash and 2 other radical factions, and they hit the estate with everything they had. Ravian's forces fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. Aria fought too, wielding silver blades alongside human and vampire allies. The battle raged through the underground city, fires burning, people screaming. She was separated from Ravian in the chaos, cornered by 3 enemy vampires in one of the narrow streets. She took down one with her blade, but the other 2 were too fast. Claws raked across her side, and she felt hot blood soak through her shirt. Pain exploded through her. Then Ravian was there. She'd seen him fight before, but nothing like this. He was a force of nature, rage and power given form. The 2 vampires were ash before they could even scream. Then he was kneeling beside her, his face stricken. No, 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 no! His hands pressed against her side, trying to stop the bleeding. It's not that bad, she lied. It felt pretty bad, actually. You are bleeding. You are hurt. I told you to leave. His voice broke. I'm not leaving you, ever. She reached up and touched his face. I love you, you ridiculous vampire king. I love you. Tears, actual tears, streaked down his pale face. Please, please don't die. Not planning on it, she managed, though black spots were dancing in her vision. Ravian looked around desperately, then back at her. I could turn you. If I turn you now, you would heal. You would survive. Aria's heart clenched. They'd talked about this before, carefully. She knew he would never turn her without permission, not after what happened with Elena. But if he turned her, she would stop being human, would stop aging, stop being able to walk in sunlight, stop being the human voice in his court. If you want to, she said. I trust you. But Ravian, I need you to think about what's more useful. A vampire lover or a human partner who can bridge our worlds. He stared at her, anguish written across every line of his face. Then Soren was there, blood on his clothes, but alive. Hospital, Soren said, already lifting Aria. We have human doctors standing by. Move. The next hours were a blur of pain and darkness. When Aria finally woke, she was in a clean white room, bandages wrapped around her torso, and Ravian was sitting beside her bed holding her hand. You're alive, he said, and his voice was wrecked. Told you I wasn't planning on dying. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Ow, okay, not ready for that yet. The doctors say you will recover fully. The wounds were deep but not fatal. He pressed his forehead against their joined hands. I nearly lost you. I nearly turned you without your full consent in that moment. But you didn't. You stayed in control. Barely. He looked up at her and she saw the fear still lingering in his eyes. Aria, I cannot keep putting you in danger like this. Perhaps you were right to suggest leaving would be safer. Stop, she squeezed his hand. I made my choice. I'm staying, and we're going to keep fighting for this dream of yours until it becomes real or we die trying. That is what I'm afraid of, the dying part. Then we'd better make sure we win. He laughed, broken and beautiful. You are impossible. You love me anyway. I do. Desperately. The battle had been costly. They'd lost people, both vampire and human, but they'd also won. Thorn and his allies had been defeated, driven out of the territory, and word of Ravian's victory spread quickly through the vampire world. More lords began reaching out, interested in his treaty proposal. The human representatives became more active, pushing for additional reforms. And slowly, painfully slowly, Things began to change. It took another year, but eventually a formal treaty was signed between Ravian's coalition of vampire territories and the reformed human governments in those regions. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still radicals on both sides who opposed coexistence, but it was progress, real, measurable progress. The night the treaty was ratified, Ravian found Aria in the library where they'd first talked about strategy and philosophy. She was reading by the fireplace, comfortable and at home in this place that had become theirs. "We did it," he said, sitting beside her. "We actually did it." "We did. It's not finished, but it started." He was quiet for a moment, just looking at her. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Aria's heart stopped. "Ravian, I know this is unconventional. I know our relationship is complicated by every possible measure, but I have lived for 17 centuries, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." He opened the box, revealing a ring, silver and black stone, elegant and simple. "I cannot offer you a normal life. I cannot offer you certainty or safety, but I can offer you my heart, my protection, and every day I have left in this long existence. Aria Graves, will you marry me?" She was crying, she realized. Happy tears, the best kind. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, tender and deep, full of love and promise. "I will spend eternity trying to be worthy of you," he said against her lips. "You already are," she whispered back. They were married a month later in the underground cathedral, surrounded by humans and vampires who'd become friends and allies. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Soren served as Ravian's best man and made a speech about how love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to try. It wasn't a traditional wedding, how could it be, when the groom didn't breathe and the bride needed silver blades hidden in her bouquet just in case? But it was theirs, perfect in its imperfection. Their first dance was to music that mixed ancient melodies with modern rhythms, vampire and human traditions woven together. And when Ravian held her close, spinning her around the floor with inhuman grace, Aria thought about how far they'd both come. From an auction house where she'd been chained and helpless, to this moment, dancing with the vampire king who'd bought her freedom and then given her his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Ravian asked softly. "How none of this should have worked. How we shouldn't make sense. But we do. We really do." She smiled up at him. "I love you, my impossible vampire husband. And I love you, my brave, brilliant human wife." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for staying, for fighting beside me, for believing in what we could build together. Thank you for being worth fighting for." They continued dancing as the celebration went on around them. Outside, the world was still complicated and dangerous. There would be more battles, more challenges, more people on both sides who opposed what they'd built. But they had each other, and they had proof that vampire and human could not just coexist, but love each other deeply and truly. It was enough. It was everything. Years passed. Aria remained human, aging slowly but visibly, while Ravian stayed eternally unchanged. They'd discussed him turning her many times, and she'd decided to wait. She wanted to spend at least a full human lifetime bridging both worlds before making the choice to become vampire. Ravian supported her decision, though she knew he worried about the day she would grow old, and he would not. But that was a concern for decades in the future. For now, they had work to do and a world to change. Together, they continued pushing for reforms, expanding the treaty, creating systems where humans and vampires could interact as equals. It was slow, often frustrating work, but it was working. The underground city grew, becoming a true haven where both species lived side by side. Human children played in streets lit by magical lights, while vampire mentors taught them history. Mixed councils governed with input from both communities. It wasn't utopia, there were still conflicts, still prejudices to overcome, but it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. One evening, 5 years after their wedding, Aria found Ravian on the balcony overlooking the city. He looked contemplative, that ancient sadness touching his features. "What's wrong?" she asked, slipping her arms around him from behind. "Nothing is wrong. I was just thinking about Elena, about how she would have loved to see this." He turned in her embrace, pulling her close. "She would have liked you, I think. You have the same fierce heart. I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too, but I think in a way you are the fulfillment of what she taught me, that humans and vampires can care for each other, that love can exist between our kinds, that building bridges is worth any cost. Aria looked out at the city, at the impossible dream they'd made real. Do you think we've done enough? Changed enough? No, but we have changed something, and that is more than I dared hope for when I first walked into that auction house. He kissed her gently. Thank you for letting me buy your freedom. It led to you giving me mine. From what? Loneliness, despair, the belief that I was fighting a losing battle. His red eyes held hers, warm despite their inhuman color. You gave me hope, Aria, and that is the greatest gift I have ever received. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, love and gratitude and commitment to keep building this dream together, no matter how long it took. When they finally pulled apart, the lights of the underground city twinkled around them like stars, humans and vampires living together in fragile, beautiful peace. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth fighting for. Together, they had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged, that vampire and human could not just coexist but love each other, that hope and determination could change the world, one freed human and one reformed law at a time. And in a world that had seemed hopeless when Aria stood chained on that auction platform, that was everything. They stood together on the balcony as night deepened, vampire king and human queen, partners in every sense. The future was uncertain, still full of challenges, but they would face it together, with love as their foundation and hope as their guide. It was more than enough. It was perfect.